My Lords, I rise and begin by declaring my membership of the Advisory Panel of Peers for the Planet. And in following the Noble Lord, Lord Lilly, I will actually agree with him in some respects, which is that I do think that the International Energy Agency report is far too reliant on novel technologies. However, that's because it assumes continuing economic growth in a planet which is already exceeding very many planetary boundaries, not just the climate emergency. There's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life if we share them out fairly, and that means a different economic model. System change, not climate change, is the answer. The current system that the Noble Lord is promoting the continuation of, the acceleration of, cannot continue. That's not politics, that's physics. And I would also point to the Noble Lord that the solar and wind that he was rather deprecating are, of course, the cheapest sources of energy now, which we can use to cut people's bills. And had the government proceeded with those more in the past decade, we would see people already having significantly lower bills. But I do want to begin, not the rebuttal, but the formal part of my speech by thanking very sincerely the Noble Lady Baroness Sheehan for securing this report, as I hope the government will also, given that, of course, this debate, and I hope the government will also, given that this was a report requested by Alok Sharma as chair of COP26, providing a roadmap for the energy sector to net zero by 2050. Now, I think certainly for the UK, 2050 is far too late. We should be looking to 2030, but at least this is heading in somewhat of the right direction. And I think I'm going to try and focus on 3 points, given that the Noble Lady Baroness Sheehan has secured us this time. Rather than skimming over the top, I want to focus on 3 areas. And the first of these is the fact that the IEA very clearly says, as the Noble Lady highlighted, that pledges are just words, a hot air, without action. And the report says that the nations of the world collectively fall well short of what's needed. And the first, one of the top recommendations of the report is no investment in new fossil fuel projects. And it's really quite horrifying that this report came to Alok Sharma as chair of COP26 and, of course, as a government minister in May last year. And since that time, there have been 50 new fossil fuel schemes approved in the UK. Abigail Oil and Gas Field, a coal extension for coal licence for extraction in South Wales, oil production expanded in West Newton in East Yorkshire. And that figure of 50 comes from mid-May. Since then, we've had the Jackdaw gas field, and of course we have the threat of the proposed Cumbria coal mine. All of these new projects. And I point to the conclusion of the Committee on Climate Change, which points out that extra extraction in the UK supports a larger global market for fossil fuels. And the assessment of the Climate Campaign Uplift shows that 56 more projects could be approved between 2022 and 2025 because they were started in the process before the climate compatibility checks announced by the UK government last year. Now, I do notice that in these areas we don't hear the government using one of their favourite phrases, being world-leading or world-beating, because of course it can't claim to be. That label belongs to the members, the nations that belong to the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is promoting the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And that, of course, drawing its terminology from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is exactly the right terminology, because we face a carbon bomb which is being considerably enhanced, its threat greatly increased by all of this new development of fossil fuels. Now, the 2021 UNEP production gap reports warns that the governments collectively plan to produce more than twice the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than is consistent with 1.5 degrees. This cannot be magicked away. This is infrastructure. And I think going back to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, it is worth highlighting the fact that it originated in 2015 with Pacific Island nations. And I was in Paris at the COP talks then, it was sort of thought that 1.5 degrees was something that was necessary for these small island states to try and protect them. But we now understand that this is crucial for all of us, as our own Committee on Climate Change says, to ensure the survivability of this planet, to ensure that we don't have runaway, chaotic climate change. Now, my second point that I want to get to is draws on a debate in The Other Place, which is originated by my honourable friend Caroline Lucas. And in that, Lee Rowley, speaking for BEIS, referred to the authors of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, saying that they were talking about changes in this treaty that demanded a lowering of demand for goods, for energy, a lowering of material consumption, and a clear change in people's diets. And here I want to pick up a point from the Noble Lady Baroness Sheehan, who talked about the crucial nature of reducing waste. And those reports that she was looking at, I think, were looking at waste as the very obvious things that we all see with uninsulated homes and buildings, with lights blazing away when they're not needed, obvious things that are labelled as waste. But there's much more energy consumption and carbon emissions in our society that are damaging to people's lives and well-being, actively harmful. And that, if we think about fast fashion, we think about factory farming, we think about so much of the advertising that often uses these days video-powered advertising, advertising for gambling, for alcoholic products, advertising for junk food that bombards us from every corner. We could greatly improve our mental health with more mindful energy use, thinking about where we should be using our energy and where we could actually improve our lives by using less. Now, the third point I want to raise is the issue about social justice. And the IEA report crucially points out that there are currently 785 million people in the world without access to electricity and 2.6 billion people who lack access to clean cooking options. Now, I said at the start that there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life if we share them out fairly. Those are people who clearly need considerably more access to the planet's resources. We need to ensure that they have access to the technologies, to the infrastructure for renewable energy, for clean technologies that are also the cheapest form of technologies available to them. And I will pick up on the point of the Noble Lord Lilly, who suggested that people were being alarmist about the climate emergency. Well, I'd invite him to look up an article today on the Reuters news agency. It's an article that draws on research from the British Medical Journal about the threat of high temperatures presents to pregnant women, higher maternal mortality, higher maternal morbidity, higher infant mortality when women are in extreme temperatures. And this article visits the Pakistan city of Jacobabad, where on May 14, temperatures exceeded 51 degrees Celsius. Now, we've got in the UK what people are talking about as a heat wave now, which is vastly below those figures. 51 degrees in May, which is utterly unseasonal. So we are talking about climate justice, and we often use that as a phrase, but climate justice means a livable condition for pregnant women in that Pakistani city who are suffering, working, trying to survive.